by Chet Huntley and David Brinkley.
The Viet Cong said today it will observe 3-day ceasefires for both the Christmas and New Year's holidays. Allied spokesman had no comment to make, but it's believed the Allies will observe only a scheduled 24-hour truce at Christmas. Almost 30,000 Americans have been killed so far in the Vietnam fighting. Last week, 228 died, the greatest number in more than 2 months. Most of them were killed in the fighting near the Cambodian border. 223 South Vietnamese died, and enemy killed were estimated at 2,689. In the Mekong Delta, units of the United States 9th Infantry Division continued their search for Viet Cong. Here is a report on an operation in Kien Hoa Province from NBC News correspondent Liz Trotta.
Hundreds of rivers and canals twist and turn across the face of Kien Hoa Province. This is the birthplace of the Viet Cong. Operation Tiger Claw was conducted by the Mobile Riverine Force and the 9th Infantry Division. The American boats carried the troops to the banks of the Ham Lung River. Then the helicopters went out to search for targets. The main object was to pursue and engage the 516th Viet Cong Battalion. Once the suspected enemy areas were marked with smoke, the airstrikes were called in. And then the troops, 2 companies of them, were landed just north of the village of Mo Kai. This is the dry season in the Delta, but you'd never know it. The Americans moved slowly, pulled down by the thick gray mud. The canals seemed endless, and crossing them, a hand-to-hand helping process, consumed time and strength. Along the trails were signs put up by the Viet Cong indicating the area was a booby trap zone. Local peasants, thought to be Viet Cong, were picked up along the way and interrogated or used as booby trap scouts. Every now and then, sniper fire echoed through the jungle, and the troops took cover, listening to determine where the bullets were. When the troops reached a large rice field in the middle of a village, someone called out that 3 persons were seen running into a tree line. No one really knew whether they were Viet Cong or civilians. The order to fire was given. The bullets rained amidst the houses filled with women and children. There's an old Oriental proverb that refers to the dragon shape made by the waters that cross the Mekong Delta. The proverb says, "He who controls the mouth of the dragon controls the delta." Kien Hoa Province is in the mouth of the dragon, but who controls it, or the delta, is still a debatable point. This is Liz Trotta, NBC News, with the 9th Infantry Division in the Mekong Delta.
The Huntley-Brinkley Report is produced by NBC News and brought to you in color by
Anacin, with the specific compound that relaxes tension as it relieves headache pain. Reach for Anacin.
Tie a bow? Simple. Except when arthritis flares up with pain, stiffness. For help, reach for Anacin, with the pain reliever doctors prescribe most for arthritis. When even simple movement can cause pain, Anacin relieves minor pain, and so eases stiffness for hours, brings more freedom of movement without pain. Minutes after taking Anacin, the joy of doing simple things returns. Anacin.
A mother's world is a busy world, and it can't stop for a virus cold. To keep going, you need aspirin for headache, antihistamine for runny nose, decongestant for stuffiness, and you get all 3 in Dristan tablets, the concentrated medication for virus colds. Just about everything you can do for virus cold symptoms is in Dristan tablets.
Emmy, how do you keep going with a virus cold?
I feel great.
Keep going. Take Dristan tablets, concentrated medication.
A North Vietnamese spokesman said today in Paris that one of the things holding up renewal of the peace talks is American refusal to recognize the Viet Cong as an equal partner of the North. The North and the Americans are wrangling over other procedural matters, and the result may be that the expanded talks may not start next Wednesday, although South Vietnam's delegation will be in Paris on Sunday. David?
Averell Harriman left Paris for a few days for a trip to this country, and today he went to the Pierre Hotel in New York to talk with Richard Nixon. He came out saying he thought Nixon would send an observer to the Paris talks until he's inaugurated and sends a permanent agent. But then Nixon's people said that wasn't quite right, that Harriman misunderstood, that they will send nobody to Paris until Nixon is president, whereupon he will send his own man. Here's a report from Nixon's headquarters and NBC News correspondent Herbert Kaplow.
Harriman met with the president-elect at Mr. Nixon's headquarters suite in New York's Hotel Pierre. Most of the conversation was on Vietnam and the negotiations Harriman's been participating in Paris. The other main U.S. negotiator is former Pentagon official Cyrus Vance. Harriman said today neither he nor Vance will continue their jobs in Paris much after Mr. Nixon takes office next month. This morning's meeting lasted for about an hour, after which Harriman went to the press room to report to newsmen.
Well, I explained to the president-elect that I would be living in Washington, and he said, well, then I can call on you for advice. I said, well, I don't know how to give any advice, but I'll be very glad to give any information that I may have and do whatever I can to assist in the transition from Washington. After all, the transition in Washington is just as important as the transition in Paris, because the fundamental policy decisions have to be made in Washington. I hope he was gracious in indicating he'd call upon me and during the transitionary periods.
Mr. Ambassador, you've had private talks with the North Vietnamese delegations. Can you give us any idea what their attitude is towards the new administration that's coming into the White House?
No, we're all Americans. That's one thing. And you'll find as you've dealt with the communists, they don't see very much difference between the Republican and Democratic parties. As far as they're concerned, we're all imperialist capitalists. So that I would think their attitude towards the new administration would be much the same as it's been with us.
Edwin Reischauer, formerly ambassador to Japan, is one of this country's foremost scholars on Asia and is now associated with a group called the Business Executives for Peace in Vietnam. These are business leaders who regard the war, for one thing, as an economic disaster. Reischauer spoke today and said he hoped Richard Nixon would move quickly to de-Americanize the war, to turn it over to the Vietnamese themselves. But he said he was afraid Nixon would have trouble doing this because of pressures from the Pentagon and because of military advisors telling him if only they were given a few more months, they could win it.
Congratulations. You're the first man to scale this mountain. You deserve something special. Here, have a white owl invincible. This white owl is made for men like you, determined, adventurous. Come, relax, enjoy the view, and you're invincible. Gives you that top-of-the-world feeling. Remember, you get a lot more from a white owl than just smoke.
President al-Bakr of Iraq said today at a funeral service for the soldiers killed yesterday in Israeli air attacks on Jordan that he will not withdraw his troops from that country. Former Pennsylvania Governor William Scranton, who is on a Middle East fact-finding mission for President-elect Nixon, arrived today in Lebanon and said Nixon supports a Security Council resolution calling on Israel to withdraw from occupied Arab territories in return for diplomatic recognition. David?
Most of the prosperous countries in the world, including this one, are run by the middle class. But even so, the upper classes, where there are any, look down on the middle class with disdain, and the revolutionaries, where there are any, look up at the middle class with hatred. In Italy today, more than 1 million workers put on a massive one-day strike, and in Rome there was a huge rally with strikers and students carrying signs saying, "Death to the middle class." It looked for a while as if it might get nasty. They threw rocks and bottles at the police, but instead of attacking, the police withdrew in haste, whereupon the demonstration dissolved in a confused pointlessness, and the authorities said maybe Italy's big agony was over. In Washington, in a hearing on the high cost and frequently low quality of automobile repairs, a spokesman for the auto dealers said if their work was as bad as charged, they would by now have been tarred and feathered by their customers. A report on the hearing by contributing editor John Chancellor.
That was the president of the National Automobile Dealers Association, and he said his figures showed that 64% of the people whose cars were serviced went away satisfied. This led Senator Philip Hart of Michigan to ask how the rest of the customers felt.
Why do you think that 36% of your customers felt that they got bad service? What happened?
We have objected to being called thieves and cheats. Now, I'd say that, and being very frank about it, the chances are that a good many of that 36% did get poor service. We are having our problems. We are constantly trying to correct them. But basically, everybody that brings his car into our places of business, he's not in a very good humor to start with. He didn't want it to break down in the first place. And so you will have a certain number of people who complain. A good many of the complaints was caused by confusion as to whether it should have been warranty or whether it should have been something he should pay for. It's inevitable that be disagreement there. But it also a part of it is the tremendous problem we have faced with securing skilled mechanics. There isn't any question about that. We have a terrible time doing that. And so we recognize there's been cause for complaint, and we are trying every way possible to correct it. We fully realize that the best salesmen we have are our mechanics, and the best place, the thing that makes or breaks us in the end is our service department and our reputation for giving good service.
A spokesman for the mechanics said the people who sell the service often don't know or care what is really wrong with a car, and that the rate system for paying mechanics is not realistic. So it appears that the desire to tar and feather those who run garages is not likely to pass from the American scene.
West Virginia is having a hearing on the mine disaster where 78 men were killed. Here's a report from NBC News correspondent Fred Briggs.
This was a preliminary hearing because no real inquiry can start until the mine is unsealed and inspected, and that could be 3 months from now. At best, the hearings can point the blame somewhere, but not fix it. Today's session was aimed at getting testimony from the men who were part of that disaster, while details were still fresh in their minds. And despite occasional emotional lapses, most of it was calm and technical. 4 of the 21 who got out took the stand and said there were no hints of anything out of the ordinary before the first explosion. Miners and company officials alike said they were caught by surprise.
I immediately dropped to the floor and got along the side of the wall. Of course, I've done this, crawl under a staircase, a steel staircase, because so much stuff was falling onto the building. And I used that as my means of protection. That's all there was to it.
As near as I can remember right now, when Ray Kuhn called me, he said and stated that I believe he used a catastrophe or something like that, but that something terrible had happened. So I questioned him again, and he answered me again. He said, no, he said, the parking lot all blowed up there. He said, you can't see or anything in the parking lot. Lights are out, dark, smoke or dust, whatever he mentioned. And I hung up immediately. I didn't give him any instructions, but I called my boss, Kenny Kensel, and told him, and he told me to get to the mine as soon as possible.
The company defended its safety practices, but later another miner condemned them. More miners will probably do that tomorrow. The hearings are expected to go on through Saturday. Fred Briggs, NBC News, reporting.
Enjoy an old-fashioned Christmas with wholesome sweets from Brock's. Pure, fresh, rich chocolate, meltingly good, swirled and twirled from Brock's. Sugary, sparkly, crunchies and chewies from Brock's. Meltingly wholesome, sweet and pure. Buy the bag or buy the box. Christmas means candy, and candy means Brock's.
The Huntley Brinkley Report continues, brought to you by
Borden. You'll find our new trademark on over 7,000 different products, and everyone's got to be good.
Glue wall is so strong, it even holds Elmer.
The trial of Sirhan, charged with the murder of Senator Robert Kennedy, now will begin on January 7th. The defense asked for a delay and got it over the objections of the prosecutor. It was also decided the late senator's wife, Mrs. Ethel Kennedy, will not be asked to appear as a witness, and that reporters will be put in a room adjoining the courtroom and will see and hear the trial on closed-circuit television. Closed-circuit inside the building only, no broadcast. And the trial is expected to last about 2 months. The jury will be locked up at night, but their wives and husbands will be allowed to visit them on weekends. There was new violence at San Francisco State College. Student demonstrators and Negro civic leaders had another fight with the police. About 10 were arrested and several were injured. Chet?
Richard Gibson is a round, rich businessman from Denver who played left end on the University of Alabama's winning 1946 Rose Bowl team. As far back as he can remember, though, jazz has been his abiding interest. Recently, despite the popularity of folk and rock music, he decided to do something about jazz. He put up a lot of money, put together 10 of the finest jazz musicians in the country, and booked them into a New York City restaurant where nightly they play songs like Mrs. Robinson and Bugle Call Rag. The outfit unblushingly calls itself the world's greatest jazz band, and there's no question that each man is a virtuoso. Gibson is lyrical about them individually and collectively.
Gibson, what needs do you think a band like this fill?
Well, I think jazz, to some extent, Chet, went off and left the public. And I think it's an indigenous art form. It has greatness when played greatly. And if there's any need, if music satisfies any need, I think great jazz satisfies that need. It's very rare. Jazz has become so fractionalized and gone off in so many directions that the public despite what many critics say, I think the evidence before our eyes is that jazz is not a lusty and thriving art form, that it's spun off in 100 directions of people, as the saying goes, doing their own thing. Well, their own thing doesn't seem to appeal to many people, and everyone has his own interest in life, and jazz reposes, Chet, within the player. It's a cliche, but it's true, that there's good jazz and bad jazz, rather than this kind, this kind, this kind. The slogans are Dixieland, big band, modern, new, all swing, and all of these things. But what it really comes down to, has the man mastered his instrument? Can he say what he wants to say on that instrument with rhythm and tone and finesse and power, and above all, improvisation? Jazz is a creative, improvised art form. So the men in this band, and speaking for myself, we don't really like categories, because these are great jazz players, and they can play anything.
What you've just heard was a 4-minute excursion back to the April of our years.
You get many different descriptions of a common complaint.
It's a stuffy, uncomfortable feeling for me.
It's a tense, tight burning sensation.
An upset stomach.
I suppose it's a very precise description. All I know is that, it's a rotten, miserable feeling.
Recognize your description of heartburn and acid indigestion. People are affected differently, but one product relieves all those symptoms. Digel, the extra action antacid, with the extra action of simethicone. This white layer of Digel contains effective antacids to neutralize excess acid. This yellow layer contains simethicone in a patented formulation that breaks up frothy bubbles of gas to help relax your tense, tight stomach. So whatever you call indigestion distress, remember Digel with simethicone is the extra action antacid that brings you more complete relief, tablets or liquid.
Aristotle Onassis, the husband of the former Jacqueline Kennedy, today entered St. Barnabas Hospital in Livingston, New Jersey. The nature of his ailment was not disclosed. Workers in the Renault automobile factories in France struck for 5 hours today to protest the unpopular wage control measures taken to prevent devaluation of the franc. NBC News correspondent Garrick Utley reports.
The center of the strike was the huge Renault factory in Billancourt. Here and at 5 other Renault plants, 100,000 workers stopped working for half a day to protest against Charles de Gaulle's austerity program. The strike was called by the unions, including the powerful communist CGT, who fear that the austerity will hurt the workers most. The strike was a blunt defiance of de Gaulle, who has called for an end to work stoppages and a rise in exports. Exports which depend significantly on the Renaults, which were not produced here for 5 hours today. 6 months after the spring upheaval, tension and trouble is growing again in France. De Gaulle preaches discipline, law, and order to strengthen the franc and his own shaken prestige. The workers, though, tasted power and success in May, and they are not about to give it up. Another test of strength is approaching here, and in France, such a confrontation usually ends in the streets. Garrick Utley, NBC News in Villancourt.
David Dellinger, a leader of the demonstrations at the Democratic Convention in Chicago, today criticized Senator McCarthy before a House Un-American Activities subcommittee for not denouncing police until his own supporters were beaten. Prices rose today in very heavy trading on the New York Stock Exchange. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained more than 7.5 points, and the value of an average share of common stock increased 18 cents. David?
Mrs. Aristotle Onassis, before her recent marriage in Greece and since, has lived in a very large New York apartment overlooking Fifth Avenue and Central Park. When she and her new husband returned to New York to live, it appeared there wasn't enough room in it for the two of them, her children, their servants, their clothes, and their possessions. So, Aristotle Onassis has sent his agents fanning out over New York looking for something more commodious. And one place they have looked at is on Sutton Place, a short street beside the East River, where there's a house for sale now owned by the family of Theodore Roosevelt. Mrs. Kermit Roosevelt, his daughter-in-law, lived here on Sutton Place, number 9, until she died this spring, and Aristotle Onassis's agents are interested in buying the house. The price is not stated, but houses on this block usually sell for $500,000 to $1 million. If Onassis buys it, he won't even need a mortgage. The Roosevelt family's antique furniture and artifacts have already been moved out. Some were sold at auction, and some of Teddy Roosevelt's hunting trophies are in museums. In this house Onassis wants to buy, in the rooms and hallways at one time could be found stuffed an occasional elk, and in the living room also stuffed a greater kudu and a lesser kudu. Perhaps, regrettably, they're all gone now. Good night, Chet.
Good night, David. And good night for NBC News.